government plans to introduce new employment quotas that intend to limit the number of foreign nationals employed at businesses. The policy gives the government power to seek a fine on any business whose appointment of foreign national employees is not in line with the newly introduced quotas. Now, this newly proposed policy will be out for public comment, after which it will be referred back to the Cabinet and then to Parliament for consideration. For more on this, we're joined by the CEO of the African Diaspora Global Network, Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda. Thank you, sir, for availing yourself this afternoon. After applying your mind on this new proposed policy, what have you deduced?
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon to you and your listeners. What we basically are noticing is that if overall and in general, it is a good idea to have that policy to regulate the workspace, and particularly because it also addresses issues of the exploitation of migrant workers, and also the fact that it seeks to regulate that space. But our major concern is mainly where, for example, it says that there needs to be quotas on what numbers that, a company can employ of people that already have got work visas and are already legally admitted into the country. Because now, once a person is legally admitted into the country and that person has got a visa, or work permit to be in the country, to then, take that person and begin some further discrimination, I think that becomes unfair. And, I also noticed that it also deals with, the businesses that people can be allowed to go into, and we are hoping that this in particular is not going to segregate against asylum seekers and refugees, because these are people that are regulated by a different regime of laws, like the United Nations Convention on Refugees, which specifically does not need to segregate against these people who are in the country and should be allowed to enter any sector of the economy in order for them to live on their own, especially considering the progressive stance of South Africa not to put into contempt asylum seekers and refugees.
And of course, this consultation or the public participation process will happen over a period of 3 months. Will you be making a submission? If so, what will it be?
Well, yes, definitely. What we have basically done, starting from yesterday, is that we are setting up a team of consultants that are within the migrant community to ensure that one, we want to, because if you look at what the minister said, that the policy is going to be in line with international labor law and all that. So we want to make sure that we can draw those inferences in particular in areas where we feel that there might be an infringement on international labor laws or any other statutes that South Africa has ratified and domesticated. Because sometimes there's always an oversight, like we are mentioning that if it becomes silent on the issue of how to deal with asylum seekers and refugees, it can easily become a problem, because now when the law is being applied and yet it has not really made clarity or given clarity on those issues, then we may find that a lot of these asylum seekers and refugees are going to be left out, like we have seen in Johannesburg, when the township economic bill was being brought up. So we want to try and make sure that these particular areas are covered, and of course as well to address the issue of people that are already admitted into the country, because we feel that if segregation, because when people are admitted into the country, they are admitted in terms of the Immigration Act and the labor laws of the country. But once a person is admitted into the country, to then further practice some form of discrimination, we believe that would obviously be something that would infringe on their right to work.
This proposed policy is also looking at sectors where foreigners cannot be allocated business visas and amendments to the Small Business Act to limit foreigners establishing SMMEs and trading in some sectors of the economy. Your thought on this particular issue?
Well, look, one of the things that, that we have in mind is that it is only fair that, South Africa, like any other, country, can put laws to regulate, the workspace, its economic sectors. And of course, if the people that are basically regulated, if you're saying we're not going to admit into South Africa a foreigner who wants to invest in any particular sector, because this sector is reserved, for South Africans or natives. We have seen Zimbabwe doing that. We've seen quite a few countries basically doing that. We think that it is actually a fair thing to do, but as long as when you're talking about, I mean, that particular provision that are coming into the country for the first time, that are applying for business visas to come into the country. Because the problem becomes, apparent when, for example, somebody has been lawfully admitted into the country. Once the person is admitted and resident in the country, and then the person is then subjected to this kind of further discrimination, I think that is where it becomes problematic. And that's one issue that we want to raise, that for new entrants, people coming into the country, that definitely would be applicable and it would make a lot of sense. But not for people who are already resident in the country, who also have to survive like native South Africans.
You speak of a form of discrimination. The Home Affairs Minister also releasing that list of critical skills, and much has been said about that. Do you see some friction or disparities when it comes, for instance, this issue of small business owners, people who would, make an honest living, and people who have the so-called critical skills? How do you reconcile the two?
Well, look, when we're looking at people that have got critical skills, in the majority of the cases, these are people that should be, in a position to enter into sectors, that where, for example, professional skills that are required. And in the majority of the cases, they may not really, become SMMEs. But again, if they become SMEs, we see these people as people that may create employment. And we think that there should be a reconciliation in such a way that these people that are, taken into the country for critical skills, which list must obviously, be brought in, having considered, the challenges that the country has where it has got, needs. We think that the two can be reconciled to ensure that, one, those that have got critical skills, can also be allowed to enter into economic spaces if they're already admitted into the country, because they will create employment and also assist with skills transfer.